In July 2019, an unprecedented scandal erupted in Romania, revealing how the police respond to emergency calls. A call to number 112 was made on July 25th at 11:05. The caller, 15-year-old schoolgirl Alexandra Măcișanu, gasping and stammering, told the operator that she had been kidnapped, beaten, sexually assaulted, and was being held against her will in some house.
Ce urgență aveți? Alo?
Bună ziua!
Bună ziua!
Vreau și în legătură cu poliția.
Da. Ce s-a întâmplat?
Doamnă,
Nu vă numiți.
sunt domnișoara, am 15 ani și ieri am fost sechestrată de către un domn.
Cum te cheamă?
She did not know where she was, only that she was in the town of Caracal. Before the call was cut off, the operator ironically asked how they were supposed to find her if she didn't say where she was.
Măcișanu, Alexandra, vă rog, veniți repede, nu știu unde sunt.
Cum adică nu știi unde ești? În ce localitate te afli?
În Caracal, m-a dus în Caracal, dar nu știu unde exact.
Păi dă-mi un punct de reper unde te afli în Caracal, cum crezi că te găsim?
Fortunately, Alexandra called back at 11:06, and the operator again tried to determine her location. The girl was able to give some important details. For example, she had seen a dam before her kidnapper blindfolded her. He had a gray car, and she was being held in a very old, dilapidated house near a gas station. The yard had a lot of grass and bushes, as well as 2 dogs. She even gave a name and address she had read on a business card she found, and explained that she was calling from the kidnapper's phone. The operator relayed the situation to a police officer, who continued talking to the girl. He told her to stay where she was because they were sending a team. Alexandra tried to give some additional description of the car in the kidnapper's yard, but the officer was no longer listening. The schoolgirl called again at 11:12 to ask if anyone had been sent to help her. Another officer responded in an irritated tone that a team had already been dispatched, but officers couldn't reach her in 2 minutes. Alexandra begged the officer to stay on the line because she was terrified, but he replied that they had other calls to handle. The team will arrive in 2 to 3 minutes, for God's sake, he added. The girl meekly agreed, although the emergency service staff knew that the kidnapper was expected to return any minute. For some reason, they called Alexandra back 9 more times, but no one answered, which is unsurprising. Even if she had previously planned to discreetly put the phone down, now the kidnapper certainly knew that she had called the police. 12 hours passed after Alexandra's call before the police summoned her father to the station, let him listen to the emergency call, and asked him whether it was really his daughter's voice. When the man confirmed that it was indeed her voice, they believed it was not a prank, and only then began an investigation. Unfortunately, the name on the business card Alexandra had found belonged to a man who had nothing to do with the case, and the staff of the Special Telecommunications Service were unable to triangulate the location from which the call had been made. The technicians were able to provide the officers with a very wide search radius and 3 possible locations for the girl, but none of the indicated locations was correct. The police then relied on surveillance camera footage to identify a vehicle involved in a similar case. After establishing the driver's identity, they surrounded his house. Although legally it was not necessary, the police submitted a request for a warrant and simply waited. They received the warrant at 6 a.m. on July 26th, 19 hours after Alexandra's call, and only then did they knock on the gates of the suspect's house. Of course, they were too late. In the house, they found Alexandra's clothes and jewelry, in the car one of the girl's earrings, and in the yard a metal barrel containing ashes and human remains. The man claimed that he did not know any Alexandra Măcișanu and that the ashes in the barrel were from a fire he had lit to protect himself from pesky mosquitoes. However, after carefully examining the contents of the barrel, investigators were able to recover 6 teeth. Laboratory analysis left no room for doubt. The teeth belonged to Alexandra. The police arrested the owner of the house, 66-year-old Gheorghe Dincă, a retired mechanic. Neighbors knew Gheorghe as an aggressive, antisocial man. So antisocial, in fact, that for his rare visitors there was a special code, 3 knocks on the door. The man suffered from antisocial personality disorder and had been hospitalized in psychiatric institutions 5 times, possibly due to a difficult childhood. Gheorghe's father worked as a butcher, illegally selling meat. He would kill and butcher animals in front of his son, often forcing the boy to help. Soon, this became routine, and Gheorghe himself began killing street animals for his perverse pleasure. His father drank heavily and beat the boy several times a day with a belt, a broom, and even the hose of a washing machine. He also tied his son with a wire so that he could not go outside to play with other children. Interestingly, Gheorghe later treated his own victims in the same way. It is unsurprising that he performed poorly in school, but when he joined the army, it seemed that life was improving and he had found his place, until he beat another soldier, the son of a Ministry of Defense official. Expelled from the army, Gheorghe returned home and found work as a hospital laborer. Again, it didn't work out. He was fired after brutally beating an Albanian worker. Following an attack on a young woman, he was deported from the country. After returning to Romania, he worked as a mechanic, did some taxi driving, and collected and sold scrap metal. Despite his antisocial and reclusive nature, he managed to start a family and became the father of 4 children. His wife, tired of his constant beatings, lived and worked in Italy. Sources close to Gheorghe report that when his wife last visited Romania, he severely beat her. The 4 children also left the family home. 3 sons chose to live with their mother, while the daughter settled in Timișoara. After Gheorghe's arrest, she stated that she no longer communicates with her father, whom she considers mentally ill. 3 days after the arrest, another piece of news shocked the public. Gheorghe confessed to the murder of a second girl whom he had kidnapped in April, 2 months before Alexandra's abduction. The first victim was 18-year-old Luiza Milencu. Until the age of 12, Luiza lived with her mother, Monica Milencu, in Italy, where her mother worked and tended to vegetable planting. Later, seeking a better life and income, Monica moved to the United Kingdom, while Luiza chose to finish school in her home country, living with her grandparents. She devoted much time to her studies and was determined to obtain a good education in order to find a decent-paying job and support her family. Relying on her mother's help, Luiza received money on April 14th for sports shoes. She went to Caracal to use an ATM, but for some reason could not withdraw the money. She called her grandfather to let him know she was returning home and went to the bus stop to wait for a minibus. However, as it was Sunday and public transport, which local residents often complained about even on weekdays, was not running, Luiza decided to try to catch a passing car. Unfortunately, Gheorghe Dincă happened to drive by. He agreed to give the girl a ride. During the drive, Luiza talked and explained that she could not withdraw money from the ATM. Hearing this, Gheorghe offered her 30 lei, approximately $7, for sexual services. She refused, and Gheorghe decided to take what he wanted by force. Meanwhile, her grandfather, knowing that his granddaughter should have already been home, began to worry. He called her mobile phone, but she did not answer. Knowing this behavior was completely uncharacteristic of her, he rushed to contact the police. The officers refused to accept his report because it was Sunday, and they bluntly told him that an 18-year-old girl might have gone somewhere with a lover. Luiza's family had no choice but to search for her themselves. Classmates spread information about her disappearance on social media. The next day, Luiza's grandfather received a call from a man claiming that Luiza was fine but did not want to speak with him. He added that they planned to go to Switzerland together. The grandfather did not believe a single word and contacted the police several more times but received no assistance. Luiza's mother, Monica, flew in from the United Kingdom, but the officers were little more helpful. Only on the 4th day did the police begin an investigation, which could more accurately be described as harassment of the family. Luiza's grandfather was subjected to a lie detector test because he was considered a suspect in withholding information. Finally, on May 30th, the case was transferred to the Organized Crime Investigation Directorate, which on June 6th announced the opening of a criminal case. They decided to investigate the girl's disappearance as a human trafficking case because there were signs that Luiza might have been coerced, for sexual exploitation. Dicot officers continued this investigation when news came of the disappearance of another girl, Alexandra Măcișanu. Alexandra Măcișanu, a 15-year-old teenage girl from Dobroslovani, was studying in the 10th grade at one of the best schools in Caracal. On July 24th, Alexandra left home at 10 a.m. to meet a friend from Caracal. She was never seen again. Her parents rushed to report her missing to the police, but the officers did not take their concerns seriously, claiming that she was old enough to go out with friends and lose track of time. They were told to wait. When the truth about the two murders came to light, the criminal inaction and negligence of officials and law enforcement triggered a major political crisis in the country. Many authorities tried to show that they were doing their jobs, but it did not help. The Minister of Internal Affairs, the head of the criminal police, the director of the emergency service, and the leadership of the police and prosecutor's office in Caracal were all dismissed. The Prime Minister fired the Minister of Education, who had cynically claimed that young girls should think before getting into strangers' cars, as if she were unaware of the country's public transport problems and the fact that catching rides is sometimes the only way to get around small towns. The police stated that staff of the Special Telecommunications Service were unable to provide more precise information about where the calls had originated, which is why the searches focused on the wrong locations. However, the police were also accused of acting too slowly and chaotically. Furious, Louisa's grandfather called them criminals whom the government pays not to do their jobs. At the same time, the question arose about the remains of the murdered girls. And here begins the main mystery of this story. Gheorghe claimed that he had burned the bodies. He scattered fragments of Louisa's bones in the forest and disposed of her clothes, but he did not have time to do the same with Alexandra's body and clothing. Investigators conducted a reconstruction of the crime scene. Gheorghe was asked to lead them, step by step, through all the places he had been on the days of Louisa's and Alexandra's deaths. That is when he began to get confused in his testimony, supposedly struggling to remember what he had done. According to criminologists, Gheorghe deliberately sent them chasing ghosts. Although he admitted to the two murders he was asked about, when the man was asked to repeat his actions during the crimes and show where he had left what remained of the bodies, he panicked. Probably he had a secret place where he hid all of his victims. And since there were likely more than two bodies there, he began to mislead the investigators, showing different locations while pretending to be confused, unaware, and forgetful. Although fragments of someone's bones were found in the forest, experts believed that the actual bodies were either in the Danube or in the Olt River. In November 2019, while in prison, Gheorghe began writing a confession, describing in detail what he had done to Louisa and Alexandra. He started his account with April 14th, when he stopped his car as Louisa was hitchhiking. He agreed to give her a ride, and after talking with her a little during the trip, he realized he was aroused. He could think of nothing else but satisfying his desire. The man offered the girl 30 Romanian lei, about $7, for sexual services, and when she refused, he hit her in the face and tied her with a belt. Interestingly, Gheorghe also blindfolded her so that the victim would not know the way to his house. Does this mean he had planned to let her go alive? After parking the car at his home, he noticed a neighbor in the yard, 36-year-old drinking enthusiast Ștefan Repeciano. Ștefan occasionally helped Gheorghe clean the yard. Seeing a beautiful young girl in the car, Ștefan asked who she was. Having no choice, Gheorghe said that he had brought her for sexual services, and the neighbor asked to join him. Gheorghe agreed. The men abused Louisa and continued tormenting her for 4 days. On the morning of the 4th day, Gheorghe lost his temper when the girl tried to resist him one last time. He severely beat her and left her in a pool of blood on the bed, going out briefly to feed the otters. When he returned, it was already impossible to help her. He did not panic. He placed her in a metal barrel and set it on fire, covering it with plastic and cardboard, then went to sleep. Upon waking, he collected the ashes and bone fragments and scattered them along the edge of a nearby forest. Gheorghe's account of what happened to Alexandra is even more sinister. On July 24th, 2 months after Louisa's murder, he again noticed a girl hitchhiking. Although he was driving in the opposite direction, he turned his car around and offered her a ride. The same scenario repeated. He offered Alexandra 50 lei for sexual services, and when she refused, he kidnapped her. He brought the bound girl home, tied her to the bed, and abused her. The next day at 6 a.m., Gheorghe was drinking coffee while his victim lay tied to the bed. The girl complained of a severe headache and asked for painkillers. Gheorghe offered to go buy some medicine. Before leaving, he additionally tied her with ropes, wire, and a chain. Besides the medicine, he bought a prepaid card to call Alexandra's mother. Inserting the card into the girl's mobile phone, he called her mother and claimed he was Alexandra's boyfriend and that she was safe. He then threw the phone away. It was later found, having been played with by some children. Gheorghe returned home around noon and saw that Alexandra had freed herself and was wandering the house with his phone. He struck her several times. She fell, hit her head on the cement floor, and died. The man wrapped her body in bedding, placed some wooden boards and chips and a 2-liter bottle of petroleum jelly into a barrel and set it on fire. On top, he threw thick bitumen-coated cardboard. He also threw in his mobile phone. Then he went to sleep. He was awakened early the next morning by barking dogs as police were pounding on his doors. Despite Gheorghe's confession and the results of DNA analysis, the families of Alexandra and Luisa refused to believe that he killed the girls. And it was not just a matter of their unwillingness to accept that their daughters were gone. There was a real reason to suspect Gheorghe of human trafficking and that the girls might not have been killed but sold for exploitation. First of all, this theory is supported by the fact that human trafficking is a fairly widespread phenomenon in Romania. Moreover, in 2022, Gheorghe retracted his confession. He confirmed that he had kidnapped and abused Alexandra and Luisa, but later claimed that he had handed them over to a local criminal boss who sent the girls to a brothel in Turkey. Police allegedly cover for this boss, which is why they forced Gheorghe to take the blame for the murders. And Alexandra's teeth were supposedly planted. Some facts make the man's story hard to dismiss entirely. It is unclear why Gheorghe did not immediately dispose of Alexandra's body, knowing she had called the police with his phone and instead cremated her body slowly over 8 hours. Cremating an entire human body should produce a very unpleasant smell and smoke. Yet Gheorghe's neighbors noticed no smoke, smell, or anything unusual. The way Gheorghe acted during the kidnappings shows that he knew step by step how to behave. He knew how to select victims of a certain appearance, and the act of kidnapping itself was almost standardized. The series of likely crimes was interrupted only because Alexandra broke his usual routine by calling the police. Furthermore, investigators suspected that Gheorghe may have had accomplices. The reason is that, immediately after the girls' disappearances, the two families received several calls from unknown individuals assuring them that the girls were safe. At least 2 calls were made by Gheorghe himself, but Alexandra's mother and Luisa's grandfather are convinced that 2 different people called them. The possibility that Gheorghe had accomplices prompted not only Romanian police, but also the FBI, Eurojust, and Italy's main anti-mafia authority to get involved. In particular, the prosecutor had received video evidence showing Gheorghe's car connected to Luisa's abduction, but never summoned him for questioning or ordered a search of the suspect's car or house. After Alexandra disappeared, the prosecutor did not share the surveillance footage with other investigators until July 27th. Even then, he only showed them a single frame in which the car's license plate was not visible. Additionally, after searching Gheorghe's home on July 27th, another investigator not only claimed that Alexandra had been killed at 2 a.m. that day, but also stated that the cause of death was strangulation. Yet how could he know that without the victim's body? Gheorghe had not yet made a confession. Finally, perhaps the most curious argument supporting the theory that Gheorghe might have been involved in human trafficking concerns his daughter, Daniela Dincă. She told investigators and the media that she did not want any contact with her father and did not communicate with him. It turned out this was a lie. She did communicate with him, and she herself has a criminal record. Several years ago, she was accused of connections to human trafficking networks. Another revelation followed. Gheorghe's son, Don, allegedly participated in a gang assault but avoided punishment thanks to his father's intervention. Gheorghe apparently had connections in the police and prosecutor's office. The victim was persuaded to withdraw her complaint and the case was classified. Another important question in this case is whether Gheorghe's list of victims might be longer. The two girls were kidnapped under similar circumstances while trying to hitch a ride, and they had a similar appearance. This points to a characteristic criminal signature, his habit of relying on chance and his interest in a specific type of appearance. The man's compulsion to commit crimes can partly be explained by his antisocial personality disorder. This condition is characterized by a constant drive to seek pleasure and gratification, a lack of ability to empathize with or respect the feelings, needs, or suffering of others, and an absence of remorse after harming or injuring another person. Some individuals with this condition cannot form close relationships and use dominance and intimidation to control others. But what is surprising is Gheorghe's age, 66 years. Offenders with a similar diagnosis typically evolve into violent killers in their youth. This disorder stays with a person throughout life. It does not appear and then fade like other psychiatric conditions. In other words, it is rare for a man of his age to suddenly kill two girls 2 months apart at 66, and it is highly likely that Gheorghe committed other horrific crimes in the past. It is improbable that Alexandra and Louisa were his only victims. Very improbable. Gheorghe was charged with human trafficking, trafficking of minors, 2 cases of assault, 2 murders, and 2 cases of desecrating bodies. But he did not intend to surrender easily. The monster of Caracal, as he was called, tried to take Romania to the European Court of Human Rights, claiming a lack of evidence and arguing that he had been treated unfairly during detention. He fought for a long time but ultimately lost. On September 23rd, 69-year-old Gheorghe was sentenced to the maximum possible penalty, 30 years in prison. The total of all charges against him would have amounted to 108 years of imprisonment, but for individuals over 65, the maximum sentence is capped at 30 years. He is also required to pay compensation of 700,000 euros to the victims' families. Gheorghe's neighbor, Stefan Repeciano, was sentenced to 7 years in prison for assault. In March 2023, Gheorghe again drew public attention, announcing that he had repented and found God. He claimed that he had been able to forget and leave the entire story behind. Unlike him, the victims' families will never be able to forget what happened.